I'm honored to be here, and I'm honored to have recently joined the Alice Ferguson Foundation Board. I want to welcome you to our 12th Annual Trash Summit. Thank you all for being here and taking time out of your busy schedules to be here to hear all the presenters. I really became attracted to Alice Ferguson Foundation through a friend of mine that introduced me to Lori a little over a year ago. You really have to go to the farm to see a lot of what it is they're doing. But I happen to live in Capitol Hill, Southeast DC, on the southeast side. My kids go to public school, and as I started hearing about the mission that Alice Ferguson Foundation puts forward every day in helping kids connect with the land, connect with trash initiatives, really just get exposed to nature, hearing some of the individual stories of these kids as they get out there, it really felt like a special place to be able to put my time and to help support spreading this knowledge and exposing more children who maybe on an everyday basis do not have the opportunity to get out into nature and to spend time hearing about the things that maybe they don't see in front of them every day. So if you haven't spent any time at the farm, if you haven't supported or even an individual basis, Alice Ferguson Foundation, please check us out. I'll be around after this panel as well, so if there's anything you had questions about the organization, please, by all means. It's a wonderful place. On to trash. Restaurants are not great, getting better at some of our trash initiatives. You may be surprised, we operate around 50 restaurants at Elevation Burger, and you'd be surprised that sometimes when we're going to set up our recycling programs, we recycle inside of our own restaurants. Some landlords still in some jurisdictions don't actually even provide separate recycling bins for restaurants or commercial businesses to be able to access and utilize. And so not only do you have the complicated conversation about how do you get businesses themselves to adopt these practices, but it's all the way down the waste stream and all of the places that businesses have to rely on in order to get rid of their waste. We have a really outstanding panel. I'm really looking forward to listening to the conversation and hearing what these folks have to say. We had a really great pre-call. I think you guys are going to enjoy the dialogue. And with that, I'll take a few minutes and introduce our panel. After, I'll read their bio, and I'll turn it over briefly to each panelist if they wanted to add anything. So Tom Spray is Senior Vice President and Director of Innovation and Technology at KCI Technologies. In recent years, Tom has been actively engaged in the topic of marine debris and ocean plastic, heading up KCI's marine debris management practice. He has more than 38 years of experience in design, construction management, and operations of solid waste facilities, water and wastewater systems, and general environmental engineering. For nearly 20 years, he served as manager of KCI's environmental discipline, which includes water, wastewater, solid waste, and geotechnical engineering, hazardous waste and environmental compliance, marine engineering, and industrial hygiene services. In a prior position, Tom served as the director of the Maryland Environmental Service, Water and Wastewater, Waste Management, and Environmental Dredging Programs, where he was responsible for managing funding, design, operations, regulatory compliance, and construction management. Please welcome Tom. And to Tom's your right, we have Denise Naguib from Marriott International. Denise was born in Cairo and moved to Michigan, Minnesota, and Oregon, where she attended the University of Oregon. She earned a BS in geography with an emphasis on biological and human impacts on the environment. Denise became involved with Jean-Michel Cousteau's Ocean Future Society, implementing environmental education programs globally. In 2005, she moved to the Cayman Islands to implement Cousteau's Ambassadors of the Environment program at the Ritz-Carlton, and then moved to Washington, D.C. to expand the Cousteau program, as well as develop the environmental strategy. Denise joined the Global Operations Division at Marriott International in 2010 and continued her work on sustainability strategy. In 2012, Denise became Vice President, Sustainability and Supplier Diversity. Since launching the company's new sustainability and social impact platform and goals in November 2017, Denise is working on projects including responsible sourcing, recycling, and food waste, and increasing spend with diverse businesses globally. Please welcome Denise. And to Denise's right, we have Dan Simons, who's one of the co-founders of the Founding Farmers and the Farmers Restaurant Group. Founding Farmers, Farmers Fishers Bakers, Farmers and Distillers, and Founding Spirits, and a teacher and lecturer at George Washington University's School of Business. Dan's a lifelong restaurateur and was named Ernst & Young's 2018 Entrepreneur of the Year for the Mid-Atlantic for his business acumen, novel approaches, and success. After 18 years of full-scale operational management and leadership experience in restaurants, Simons co-founded VSAG and built a team of passionate restaurant industry veterans with the proven ability to take business to the next level. Providing hands-on expertise in all aspects of the restaurant and hospitality industry, clients have included Pepsi, Intercontinental Hotel Group, Balducci's, and House of Blues. Please welcome Dan. Lastly, certainly not least, Andy Shallal. Andy is an artist, social entrepreneur, and founder and CEO of Busboys and Poets, a restaurant group in the Washington metro area where art, culture, and politics internationally collide over mindfully sourced food, drinks, books, and event programming. With 6, soon to be 7 locations in Washington, D.C., Maryland, and Virginia, Busboy and Poets has become a home for progressives, artists, creatives, and intellectuals. Busboy and Poets also focuses on sustainable business initiatives and employment practices. As a business on the forefront of environmental stewardship, Busboy locations are 100% wind-powered with local sourcing, including many plant-based and gluten-free friendly options. As a leader in the sustainable food movement, Busboys has been recognized locally and nationally for its innovative, conscious cuisine. Under Shallal's leadership, Busboys has received numerous awards, including the Mayor's Arts Award, Employer of the Year from the Employment Justice Center, and the Mayor's Environmental Award. Please welcome Andy. This one's a 3-parter. What successes has your business had around waste reduction and sustainability efforts? How can these successes be scaled up? And how can your business be a case study for others? Pick on you, Dan. You go first.
So we've realized from the very beginning that there's a lot more to being a restaurateur than food and service. And so we started our business with our partners who are family farmers. So from the very beginning, for us, it was more about, we're a for-profit business, but it was mission above profit. And every year, that feels like a kick in the teeth as we strive to deliver on the mission. But it takes a relentless effort. So we've had some success, a lot of success making our decisions inside the 4 walls. For example, bottled water, making that decision to not serve and sell bottled water or plastic bottles. So, the math is pretty staggering. Just in the past year, we've probably kept 3.5 million plastic or glass bottles out of the waste supply by choosing to forego the profit and forego the sale. And so we invest in a filtered water system, and we just don't take the profit. I go to profit because I could tell a lot of stories today, and actually listening to Conrad's keynote is inspiring because someone has to work at this massive scale. We're this tiny little business, and it is hard every day to do this, because some days I want to grab for that profit and sell that bottled water and throw that thing in the trash. I'll never do that, but as a for-profit business, we're always reminded to look for ways to connect with our guests and tell our story. Same with plastic straws. we never used plastic, we used compostable. Then I found out that compostable straws are bullshit and don't really end up composted, but we thought we were doing something valuable. And then I learned what biodegradable meant, and so we switched to paper, and then paper, you can't get the supply, so we switched to hay, and they're awesome. But sometimes guests complain, and you still have to educate, so, we've kept millions of straws out of the waste supply chain. So we've found some of these things that allow us to, I think, be successful and make a difference, but our hope is that we're role modeling it for our industry. Because when I see what Conrad puts up there, what one restaurant group, as many millions of pieces as we can affect, we need to try to affect the whole industry. So our focus is on Washington, D.C.
this is also a big learning experience for us. And part of it is us learning and then taking that learning and educating our customers. It's a very, very difficult process, I have to tell you. We still get tweets and Yelp reviews that say we're too cheap to serve straws. And so, those types of things are something that you constantly have to educate people. When our staff goes up and say, would you like a straw? Some customers look at them like, why are you asking me that question? That's a dumb question. Of course I want a straw. And I think so part of it is the education process, exactly as you say. Part of it, I think, is trying to get landlords to really buy into the idea. I think we share some landlords, Michael, and I understand how difficult it is, especially when we try to diligently tell our staff inside to make the separation between the different types of products and how to separate them inside. And then when they go outside, they see that it's really not happening in reality. And so after a while, it becomes like, okay, you're making me do something, and I'm working really hard to do this, and it's not really ending in the right place, and so what's the point? And then you have to re-educate and re-educate and re-educate. So that's a complicated thing. I have to say, I had the pleasure of riding a canoe with Tommy Wells down the Anacostia River. And nothing really highlights this issue more than a canoe ride down the Anacostia River. You see the amount of waste that is just floating on the sides, especially after a rain. You see the wash, of all the bottles and straws and things like that floating. And it starts to put, this abstract idea that all this trash is gathering somewhere in reality. And you start seeing an impact of it. I had the pleasure to travel to Haiti a while ago and recognized that plastic is burying Haiti. I mean, you have streets and rivers that look like plastic moving barges. We can't even see the water. There's so much plastic. And that only started after the idea of plastic water bottles. And it has become a tremendous waste problem, I think, not only here in the United States, but all over the world. And I think sort of seeing the visuals help us to understand a little bit better about the end impact of what's happening when we do it in our spaces. So the education part, I think, is the key for this to really work.
And for us at Marriott, so we have a very global footprint. We have almost 6,900 hotels in 122 countries, and we have about 1.5 million people come to our hotels every day. So I'm talking about education. The opportunity is massive to educate all of you, all of us as travelers around the world. In every touch point across the hotel, whether it be in the restaurants, in the hotel room itself, at events, et cetera. And it is complicated, and the opportunity is definitely ours to own as the largest hotel company in the world, but we absolutely have to have our hotel associates obviously be a critical part of that, over 750,000 associates. So thinking about kind of educating that audience first and foremost, getting people who are coming to stay with us to understand their play and how they kind of engage with this space, and then throughout our supply chain, again, every single major company that provides us product around the world, how do they actually get that product to us? What kind of resources are they using? What are they leaving at our back doors when they do those deliveries is really, gets really compounded. So our team is really focusing on how do we take this giant issue of trash and tackle it in a multitude of ways. We have set a very aggressive goal of reducing our waste by 45% by 2025 from our 2016 baseline. And just even looking at that, getting a baseline on waste is incredibly challenging because of all of the things you've all touched on. So many places, they don't even have the facilities in place. We don't have the data to actually know how much waste we are producing in a really good way. So anyway, I think the opportunities are absolutely huge. What to kind of break it down a little bit, what are some ways to kind of use it pilots? So we do a lot of tests with individual hotels, groups of hotels around the world to test theories, test ideas. We had a group of hotels, for example, test the amenity bottles being pump based as opposed to the little tiny bottles, and get feedback from customers and figure out, does it work? How does housekeepers interact with this? How are they going to clean it? How do the suppliers provide the product? All of these things to get it right before we then deploy in tens or thousands of hotels around the world. So it is really for us really using it as an opportunity for us to learn, but also to help educate our stakeholders around the world.
So I'm a little bit the different one at the table here, consulting engineering business. We're not consumer oriented, we're public works oriented. We're engineers, we're scientists. We're a pretty good sized company, and as I've been listening to Conrad and some of the other speakers today already, I'm making notes about things that we need to kind of catch up as a company. But just, I guess my take on to address the question, our business is responsive to our clients' needs. And by that I mean public works agencies put out requests for proposals that say, we have a waste problem of one kind or another, we want to recycle, we need a replacement for our landfill, or we need another alternative, and we wait to answer the mail. And I think one of the things that is different in my world today, and I think I'm starting to see this more and more in engineering and science, is that we've got to stop being so bashful, and we need to now give our clients ideas and solutions to problems that they may not actually even see. I'll just give you just kind of an illustration of that. I've designed a lot of landfills, recycling centers, convenience centers, a lot of things having to do with waste management infrastructure. And when you see so much garbage, as I have, you realize that, okay, there's lots and lots of garbage, let's just sort of get used to it. You're not awestruck by mountains of garbage in a landfill. It wasn't until I got to Rio de Janeiro, Brazil, on a mission to go down and work on the Guanabara Bay that I realized what a difference it is when you see lots and lots of garbage in the water. It's a whole different experience. And they wanted to talk about water quality and what we've done in the Chesapeake Bay to clean up nutrients and so forth. And I'm thinking, don't even talk about water quality until you can see the water. And it was that sort of that Kool-Aid in Brazil that I brought back to KCI and said, listen, we've got to invest a little bit into the future. We've got to go out 2 or 3 years. Our clients are not asking us for these solutions yet, but it's time now to start working on those. So it's a little bit different for us. Having said that, we're an employee-owned company. We have a pretty sustainable platform as part of one of our pillars. You'd call it the sort of the social pillars. We have a LEEDs Gold office building. Our chairman of the board was an originator of this idea of like LEED buildings, like vertical structures that are all about sustainability and reuse of materials and energy recovery. That's missing in a lot of the linear infrastructure, roads, highways, pipe facilities, and so forth. So we began a thing called the Institute of Sustainable Infrastructure, which is all the stuff outside the fence. And I think that's starting to take off. It will have a domino effect, a multiplicative effect as our clients start to buy into those kinds of projects. And so that's kind of what we do.
So I think some of the next questions you guys touched on a little bit, and so I'm gonna combine one of the questions kind of on the consumers. I'm gonna skip our second question for now. How is it that you're evaluating and balancing your consumers' preferences as you consider your waste reduction and sustainability business decisions? And then at the same time, because I know we touched on it, how is it that you're actually educating your consumers as to what you're doing? One of the challenges that we have as a business is, as businesses, is it's great to be approaching the business with a level of altruism, but at the end of the day, you can't scale unless you retain profitability. And so that's one of the constant tugs is how do you respond to what the changing consumer preferences are amongst your consumer groups, balanced with how it's going to affect your cost. And then once you decide to do it, how is it that you're bringing that information back to your consumers? So, I hate to use the word, but to take credit for what it is that you're doing so that it helps your business grow.
Start, or I'd be happy to start. I think the way that I've always approached things is I don't start with the bottom line. I start with the idea of what I want to do. And I think it's, when you think about these things, these are the right things to do. And once you set these in motion, you start, sort of backtracking to catch up to what that means. Now, it oftentimes means a lower bottom line, but that's part of the deal. And you hope that by educating your consumers, by standing out in front, by telling them what you're doing, that they will support you more, that they will come back and become regular customers. So that's really the approach that we've taken. We've never said, okay, let's do this idea and let's see how it impacts the bottom line. And then if it impacts the bottom line, we just say, no, we're not going to do it. That's never been the approach. The approach is always, if it's a good idea and if it's the right thing to do, we'll do it, and then work through somehow to get a bottom line that makes sense. And oftentimes, it does mean a lower bottom line. But that's, we're in business to stay, not for a short period of time.
I think it's interesting to have a business where you're inspired to have the courage to tell the truth to the customer. So I'll just go back to straws because it's been a 10-year journey for us, and I have to be able to look a guest in the eye, and guests will say to me, this, I don't like this paper straw. I don't like the way it feels in my mouth. And I say, I get that, but I don't really like the way the plastic straw looks on the beach. So, what do you want? And so I have found that the guests, for the most part, when you have the courage to engage, are really open to it. It's difficult now, with Twitter and everybody has a microphone, which I generally think is a good thing because you can engage and communicate with people. They can criticize you, but you can respond back. So I think what our consumer preferences as a restaurateur, they want value, they want a great experience, they want it to be delicious. And thankfully nowadays, a lot of guests wanted to align with their own values or their own principles. It's telling them in that moment, because you can take the most mission-driven, green, environmental, crunchy granola person, and then you hand them a paper straw, and they're like, I don't like the way that feels in my mouth. And you're like, okay, let's take a breath, right? And so I think that we have to have the courage to change the consumer preference to align what people think they like with help people realize what they care about. So we just try to educate, and I found that, we started a nonprofit, and actually I'll give a little shout out to Julie and Selena who are back there with Our Last Straw. We realized we needed to educate at a larger scale outside of our four walls so that we can almost create a consumer preference for the sorts of thing that we're doing. And even though your question is about consumer preference and how that affects our business, I have learned that these voluntary programs, they're not going to work. We're not going to move the needle as a society. So I'm a business person saying regulate, lobby, have laws, right? And thankfully, there are, politicians and elected officials like Tommy Wells who are having the courage to say, you know what? Smart regulation, I don't know about you, but who doesn't think that rules are a good idea? So we need business people to speak up about this, and we need consumers to say, this really is our preference. Because at the end of the day, we can forego some amount of profit, but we're private businesses. For Marriott, there's an amount of profit they can't forego unless there's a return on the investment. So it circles back to the consumer to vote with their pocketbook that aligns with their principles so that the businesses, the independents like us, we're out there trying to survive and thrive. the huge public companies that can really move the needle, they got to know it's good business too. So that's sort of how I connect the whole consumer preference cycle.
Yeah, I mean, it's a really good point, and there are times where things we want to do cost more money, and it is a really difficult sell inside of our own building to say, people want this, we need to make the move. Yes, it's going to cost profitability to our hotels. We also are a management company. We don't own any of our assets, where we are paid by an owner, generally a lot of real estate investment trusts or financial institutions, to run hotels on their behalf using our brands. So it gets really complicated in terms of who's sort of the beneficiary of the efforts, and who also bears the cost. So I'll give you a really simple example. Our straw initiative to phase out straws over the past, or this coming year, we use 1 billion straws around the world and 250 million stir sticks. So it's not a small footprint in terms of our supply chain. It is a small footprint in terms of waste in general. Just to kind of clarify, we use a lot more other plastics, but obviously it's, the wave has come and people have recognized this, even though it's not a huge impact. But it's also a 10x cost to us in terms of if we were to just 100% switch 1 billion straws and 250 million stir sticks to the more environmentally responsible versions. It's a 10x price point. We cannot just absorb that in our costs. We have to make a major change to how we actually operate. So our number one focus was to not deliver the straw except upon request, 100%. That's the going in model. And that in and of itself reduces the impact and the volume by over 80% for our hotels that have been able to track that. I mean, that's huge. So that's, okay, you're taking what would be a 10x and taking it down by 80%. That's a big thing. And then only, again, delivering the straws to consumers when they ask. And again, using the opportunity to educate guests as to why you're making that change will ultimately reduce that more and more so that people are kind of taking less. On the other side of it, when the amenity bottles from a plastic perspective, I think what we saw with our pilots of moving to larger pump bottles is that people want choice. So where a lot of people really were excited about the pump bottles from an environmental perspective, some people hated them. They thought there was, sanitation issues, which no matter how much you communicate that there are some people who still have that concern. So having that backup of like, okay, we can give this to you for a period of time. We'll, offer guests who specifically ask those small bottles still, but nevertheless, it's going to reduce a significant amount of waste that we would have been producing otherwise. So 2 examples, it was costing us less to produce the large bottles versus the small ones, but from a consumer preference perspective, there were still people who wanted the more expensive and more wasteful version. So I think it's just about sort of working piece by piece on what that looks like. We also, back to Lori's comment about rethinking, those are not the 2 kind of big things from a plastics perspective. There's a ton of other plastic that we use throughout the hotel room and through food and beverage. I mean, talk about water bottles. It's a massive, massive nut to crack. Our team has brainstormed. Everybody's thinking about, like, how do we actually take this on, this issue of the bottle? And the biggest thing is the consumer preference, right? Their convenience that has been built into our societies of grab and go, of, the convenience of having that at the ready, and then that disposability not always being there even from a recycling perspective, let alone that single use and all the energy that goes into producing it. So we do have to think about the financials. We do have to obviously think about the consumer. And then the third bucket is the investor. And, thanks for that conversation, because I've been in my job for almost 13 years and with Marriott, and I've never seen the volume of investor interest in our space as in I have in the last 12 to 18 months. And it's awesome to be able to be at the table with investor relations, having conversations with investors who are saying, I want to know about your sustainability efforts. And that moves the needle way more than looking at, pennies on the bottom line. So I think that's a real opportunity for-profit businesses to get the pressure points from the investors, to get those investors who are looking at, non-traditional social environmental companies, but looking at what they're doing from that lens so that we can really start making some real meaningful change. So thanks.
I'll just add really briefly to that. From our business, one of the learning points here for us as we've gotten into this, and we're learning a lot as we go, is that who is our client? Who are the customers for a consulting engineering firm like ours? And it's interesting to find that it's typically not public works. I think in Washington, D.C., Tommy Wells, Matt Robinson, the folks here, Julie Lawson that are over here, there's a certain sense in some jurisdictions of the importance of litter and debris and marine debris and plastic in the water, and other places there aren't. But we find very quickly that the interested folks are environmental advocacy groups. I saw there was a big show of hands for those that were community organizers and environmental groups. Often businesses, waterfront restaurants have a particular interest in the visual quality of the water, the aesthetic of the water. It's a value. It's a cost to them if that value is low, and it's a benefit to them. It's a reverse cost to them if the water is wonderful. And I'll take an example of the District Wharf right around the corner here. It suffers when the Anacostia River is loaded with debris. Those waterfront restaurants, the promenade along there is a different experience than the days that it's not after maybe a few dry days with no rain, and it looks a lot nicer. Same thing in Baltimore. We're really seeing a big difference in terms of the value of the Inner Harbor after the last 4 or 5 years of addressing marine debris in Baltimore.
Take two of our questions again and kind of combine them. And I'm going to start with you, Tom, and then I think this is a really important set of questions, especially for us to be able to talk about here. I know there's a lot of folks here that have influence on policy and consumer behavior, and so getting this information into the hands of those that can can create action from it is really important. So, firstly, Tom, talk about the impacts. You've touched on it briefly. Talk about the impacts of waste on waterways. What does the cleanup actually look like? And how are you connecting those cleanup efforts to the groups, and then the groups that are behind the waste, and then to kind of our business panelists, operating business panelists, knowing that, I think some of us can vision what it looks like. I think hearing from Tom is going to be eye-opening, but even with that, what are the barriers? So even with that information and the knowledge, we talked a little bit about it from a business standpoint, but I'm sure I know, in our business, there's operational challenges, not just cost challenges. Once you know about it, what are the barriers to actually helping you adopt these practices? So, Tom, please.
I'll take a shot at it. The beginning point in all this for a guy like me, I'm an engineer. You learn in school to define the problem statement as clearly as possible. You hear, how many engineers in the room? Can I have a show of hands, engineers? A few, good, very good. Not all public works people that are in the waste business are engineers. I find that it's about half and half. But from an engineering standpoint, it's important to break the problem down to what is excess waste generation, and then what's waste mismanagement? What is the waste practice or lack of practice that leads to, and I'll just use the term marine debris just to be consistent. It's very difficult sometimes in the solid waste world for the solid waste managers to recognize that litter is actually their subject. I've been to many meetings where the solid waste folks, they point to the transportation folks. They do this because the transportation folks get out there and clean the highways. That's where the litter is, et cetera, et cetera. So it's so important to, I think, break down what it looks like. From the standpoint of kind of that cost and where in the problem do you start to solve it, I can tell you, you don't start first by going out in the middle of the Pacific Ocean and try to pick up plastic that's already made it to the ocean. Just saying, okay? It is exponentially more expensive to pick up trash along the highway than in the stream, and at the mouth of the stream, you have a great opportunity to take that non-point source litter pollution to a point source solution. So there's an optimum point right there. Then if it gets into a larger body of water and you've got to go out there and try to capture it in an ambient water situation, it's just very, very expensive to do that. And then, of course, if you're in a bay, or as I said earlier, the ocean, you can just see how much more difficult it is to deal with it. I think one of the things we've learned and are continuing to learn is how to define that cost and actionable item that would lead to improvement. There's a lot of convenience in our lives. The whole idea of littering is convenience. I'd rather throw it out the window of my car as I'm getting on the interstate. I have one particular on-ramp that just drives me crazy. But it's the throwing the litter out of the car versus just collecting it in the car and making it to the trash can. I mean, those, incremental human behavior equations of cost and convenience are kind of what lead to the problem. I mean, we can talk about plastics recycling and alternative materials and reducing plastics, and it would not be even an issue in terms of marine debris if all of the waste was managed correctly and it went to wherever it was supposed to go. It's the problem that we allow the litter. We allow for garbage cans to sit by the side of the road. Everybody in the household has properly collected the garbage that sit it out on the side of the road overnight, because the garbage men come really early in the morning, and by the time the garbage men get there, maybe they lose a little bit, the dog's been in there, the garbage can wasn't covered, and it wasn't intentional, but it's mismanaged, and by the time I go down to pick up my garbage can, I've got a lot of litter to pick up around there too, so it's not so convenient. Others?
One of the barriers that we face, again, is cost. So rather than me just thinking I'm complaining about it, I have some ideas about it. So we compost. So in our restaurants, we get certified by the Green Restaurant Association. I think that these third-party auditors are really valuable. And so we keep about 90% of our waste out of the landfill. Through composting and recycling and just reducing what we originally produce, and doing our own trash audits to see what's going in there. My colleague Erin, who's over there, say hi, Erin. She actually does those trash audits. She's fantastic. There's nothing she loves more than the trash. So thankfully, we're able to find amazing talent and invest in it. But when we try to set up a composting program for a new restaurant, I'm looking at maybe $18,000 a year in additional cost, that if we were a regular restaurant, we just throw it in the trash. But because of what we care about and what our mission is, we don't. So then I think, well, where do I get the $18,000? Well, the place I'd like to get the $18,000 is in a tax credit. It's a place that I can think, and look, I realize that money doesn't grow on trees for anyone. But when I look at the overall system and I think about where the money goes, the value we create by composting or potentially using a biodigester, which we do in one of our restaurants, that seems to be a really good option. But the biodigesters, I think I love them, but we're still learning. They reduce the transportation of the compost. They are less expensive overall. Each of these solutions we've learned about over the years, then we learn more and find out there's some other problem. So someone in this room could probably educate me about if there's a downside with biodigesters. But I think that if we connect the government and understand the tax system, we pay $10,000 a year per restaurant in DC, my restaurants, because of the volume of them. $10,000 a year per restaurant, $30,000 a year for the ballpark fee. Well, first of all, none of my restaurants are near the ballpark. Second of all, even though I'm a baseball fan, and this is my Red Sox pen, go Sox, yes. So, that $30,000, somewhere years ago, that decision was made that we should put $1 billion into building a baseball stadium. Fine, whatever. I don't think it's a great idea, but somebody did. But what if someone now with enough power and enough support could say, hey, what if we put $1 billion a year of tax credits or fees into this sort of a real local system in DC so that we could compost or recycle in the right containers, that landlords had to provide that space. So I'm certain the money's in the system, because if you can build $1 billion baseball stadium and and I'm not knocking the Nats, like, that's fine, I hope they do well, then I think we could reinvest money into this if people understood the total cost of the waste. And we can't just solve it by raising the price that we charge for the burger. People say, well, just pay more, just sell it for more. Soon you'll stop eating in our restaurant. So that's where I say we could solve that barrier potentially by working closely with the government and look at how we spend or assess those tax dollars.
I too pay the baseball tax, and I've never gotten a thank you letter from the Lerner family, so I have to say. But anyway, it is cost. It's definitely cost. It's a big issue, and I think on the composting side, we've had fits and starts on moving forward. I think part of it is also, it's not just the cost of the composting itself, but also the cost of space, the cost of refrigeration, the cost of all these things. And, the rents in the city are extremely expensive, and you have to have a landlord that's willing to work with you to be able to provide some lower rent for areas where you can put your composting and be able to come back to it. That's a really, really difficult process, I have to say. And especially even for smaller restaurants, it's more difficult. Larger restaurants can eat up some of that cost in the volume, but smaller restaurants have a little bit of a hard time. But really, I think it's about consumer education. I think when consumers recognize that there's a value in what they're getting, I think it makes a huge difference. I would love to see some more ad campaigns that go into really educating consumers and shaming them in a way to be just better consumers. I'm of the age when I remember that one ad with the American Indian who was standing at the side of the road. He got a tear down his eye when he sees trash being thrown. I think he was crying about many things, but that was one of the things that he was really that in that ad he was crying about. But anyway, it'd be great to be able to have some kind of an impactful, I think, sort of more relevant types of ads that I think reach young people, especially the folks that are moving into the city, and I'm talking about Washington D.C., that care once they recognize. I think people really care, but they have to be aware before they can care. You can take that as a bumper sticker if you want, but anyway, I think those are the key elements. Is really the biggest barrier to us is having a consumer that is not as educated as they ought to be, because they're the ones that are going to push us to do better. They're really the ones that are going to push us to do better, and we can always do better as a business.
Totally agree with all of that. I think similar to how energized people got behind the straw issue, we need them to get energized around many other issues that really touch on a lot of these things, and the ones that really have even more impact and more opportunity to move the needle on everything, on carbon, on water conservation, and all of these areas of focus. I think that globally we need to be paying attention to. I think that the more the society sort of is the movement, and they're educated and understand not only how do they just sort of make businesses do what they need to do, but how do they as an individual are making the different decisions, getting their wallet to kind of be voting with their wallet. I think there definitely is an opportunity there. And so I love the social movement is fabulous. I think as much as we can direct that, at the same time, I think you're right in terms of sort of the infrastructure pieces also have to be there. We can't, again, for us, I've been fortunate to travel around the world for the company, and some places you go and there is zero waste infrastructure whatsoever in massive cities. And that is really, really impactful on the ability for any business, even if you want to do the right thing, to be able to do that.
Well, thanks to technology, I've been getting the hook off the stage by my phone. So I want to. So I've got one last question. We're going to keep it very brief. No filibustering on this one. Hopefully you guys have been thinking about it. And then we'll turn it over to the audience for like 10, 15 minutes? 10 minutes, all right. So that gives me, you guys all have like 30 seconds to answer this. Okay. I already know Dan's answer too. If you could ask another business to adopt one waste reduction, and I'll broaden it out too, or sustainability goal, what would you ask of that business? No filibustering. Tom, go.
My one ask would be to pick up the garbage in front of your facility. That's enough right there.
Denise.
Visual cues as to what to recycle. We have constant challenges. We actually just ran a little challenge with our own associates, and all of us, even the sustainability team, had challenges to understand where does this go. So really clear visual cues as to what should go where.
I would inspire every other restaurant to go to ourlaststraw.org, take our pledge to committing to do in your restaurants what we do in our restaurants, and know that Our Last Straw is built to then be Our Last Blank. So we're going to take this to be Our Last Plastic Fork, Our Last Plastic To-Go Container. And joining a business-led coalition, I think, is what I would try to inspire other business people to do, because we're the ones who can drive the change.
I think the straw thing has become a really big deal because it's like the gateway to sort of sustainability. So I would say having all businesses eliminate straws altogether.
Excellent. All right, well, I think there will be a microphone floating around, so any questions at this time?
I work for the Association of Plastics Recyclers, the APR, and we represent about 90% of the plastics processing capacity in North America. And there is a robust and fairly well capitalized infrastructure for recycling fairly common consumer packaging. But the side that doesn't get talked about a lot is demand. And demand creates value for recyclables, and value is what drives the system. So I specifically wanted to ask Tom and Denise, do you all encourage, in Tom's case, do you encourage your clients to look at what they're purchasing and incorporate recycled content, specifically plastics? And Denise, I'm curious what Marriott might be looking at in that direction.
Very briefly, I think this is really a new area for consultants to work in. One of the ways we do that is to advise clients in their request for proposals and their contracting practices to stipulate certain elements. For example, for a facility construction project, that you want to achieve a minimum of LEED Silver or LEED Gold status, or maybe LEED Platinum status if you're really ambitious. I mean, we can encourage our clients to adopt sustainability practices, but we really can't force them, and we can't go beyond that very far.
We have a little more opportunity, and we have some specific goals around responsible sourcing, and as part of that, our team's embedding things like recycled content, and has been to our suppliers. So we absolutely have an opportunity to drive that through our supply chain, and we do look at recycling content, and we've been focused on it specifically on the paper side, but we are looking at the plastic side as well as part of our next iteration of those goals.
It sounds like there's a combination needed of kind of engineering processes on the one side and behavior change on the other side. How do you connect those two? How do you make behavior change easy to accomplish so that people see the choices that they have in front of them?
I'll give you a quick success story on that one. I think for those of you who have ever heard of Mr. Trash Wheel, Baltimore's Mr. Trash Wheel, okay? One of the things that really makes that whole program effective is there's an efficient piece of infrastructure, I grant you that, but there's a social media element to this thing, which is actually much larger than the infrastructure, much larger in terms of the expense and the effort that goes into it. And it's a very positive message. It's an educational message. It's an awareness. And I think what I've learned is that turning the message to a positive, looking at the benefits as opposed to shaming or guilt or, Cody, the Native American with the tear. That was a time and place. Probably had more to do with just the garbage on the road. In my experience, the positive message of teaching school kids to recycle, for example. When we opened recycling facilities 20-something years ago in Maryland, we started with the school kids and educated the kids that this is great, this is fun, you're really doing a good thing if you put certain things in this bin and as little as possible in the trash can. So, positive message.
Hi, thanks so much. Andy, you said something that I want to kind of go further on. You educate your servers to ask certain questions. On the front lines, you're advocates, but on the front lines, it's your employees. What kind of employee training do you have so that they're really empowered and passionate and they know the value of what they're doing? I remember the first time somebody asked me, "Do you want a bag?" That's a huge difference that a restaurant or a grocery store or many places can make. And they miss that opportunity because all the great ideas seem to be filtering at top, but right at the bottom, you could be engaging with your clients and really celebrating your efforts. And also, I really do believe that media and an opportunity to educate people and share ideas is the best way to get your message out. So please continue. Thank you.
Yeah, I mean, for our straw initiative, before we even publicly rolled that out, our number one approach was to make sure that our education was in place. So everybody in our system has access to certain education tools and resources, and specifically around the straws, like I said, the number one approach is to not even deliver a straw, period, unless somebody asks. So that's the training is specifically around that. It's also the part that's going to be audited. So we have audits twice a year for every single hotel around the world. The auditors, mystery shoppers, they go in, they act like a guest. And so their test is not, are you providing a paper straw? Their first step is, when I get a soda or water or whatever I'm ordering from the bar, is that coming with a straw as default? And that's the way by which we are holding our hotels accountable, is that have they trained the associates to not do that delivery except on demand? So it is 100% that very first step. There are markets where we absolutely cannot today find the alternate product. So we can't ding those markets for not having the right product, but we can help them focus on the training and ensuring that the execution of that piece is first and foremost.
Can I just add to that? So we do a lot of training with the staff on these messages, and we attract a lot of employees because of our mission who care about this. But what I've learned is that if we don't connect it to their income, then the message falls off. So what we teach the staff is, give it a try, have the courage. When you connect with a guest, especially in our restaurant, who cares about any aspect of what we do environmentally, and that guest tips you more or comes back and dines with you again, then the employees see like, oh, spreading this message and educating the guest earns me more money. So we bring almost everything back to the economic reality because, mission and passion doesn't pay your rent. But yet, when you connect it and it comes together, mission and passion, when it starts to pay your rent, then you really get on board with it. So that's how we try to, show the staff that everybody wins when they spread the message.
Hi, I wanted to ask about composting, and I'm really pleased to hear that you're doing it at Founding Farmers. So I wanted to ask, what was your motivation for adopting composting? And for Mr. Shalal, what is your biggest barrier and what would it take to get you to adopt composting?
So we've been composting for 10 years since we opened the first Founding Farmers, and we're composting in all the restaurants, including our newest in DC, Farmerson's Distillers. Please eat there. I need the help.
Whoa. We talk no advertising.
Okay. I didn't mean to say you should eat at Farmers and Distillers. That was totally out of
Stick to the straw thing.
You can drink there.
But our motivation was we knew from the beginning that we were doing LEED certification on all of our restaurants, which we still do on all of the restaurants, and that we were doing green restaurant certification. And so once we studied it a little bit and we learned about it, you kind of can't learn about it and then not do it unless there's something like if you have a landlord where it's just not feasible. So we were sort of fortunate that we had our landlords were supportive, and then before we sign new deals, we have a whole work letter that goes in of what our waste and trash and recycle program is. And if a landlord, like we just turned down another really awesome site, really good deal, because they couldn't match what we call our back dock specifications. So we now just build it in. It's a required program and we're committed to it. But I'm really hopeful that biodigesters are the answer, or that something happens with the money, because, $18,000 or $20,000 a year for the program, we're doing it, but the pressures are growing. It makes it difficult.
Dan, can I ask, is that per restaurant or is that your aggregate cost?
That's per restaurant. So $1,500 a month is a pretty standard number to pick up our volume of compost. It's not a lot of competition. Frankly, the service in the space isn't great. So it's a real challenge.
I think the barriers, I think Dan touched on them, is having the space to be able to do this. Washington has a lot of rats, and you have to be really careful in having, any kind of food held overnight that is not, well managed and has its own space. It has to be in a refrigerator space, and in some instances, I think the key, and I think Dan again touched on it, is if you begin with that in mind, then you can get it done much better than if you retrofit it afterwards. Because once you're moving forward, it's very difficult to now, manage to sort of cut off a space and be able to train the staff and get people into that kind of mode. But we're really working on it and trying to get our newest location, which is going to be in Anacostia, to be our first to be able to do composting there. And once we get that, as I think somebody alluded to that, the idea of sort of piloting something, then it'd be easier to do it in other locations. But it's not. It's interesting because if you're a very big company, you can manage to do it by absorbing the cost at some level, and if you're a very small company like a mom and pop top operation, you can also do that, but somewhere in between, it gets really difficult to do. And we're in the in-between state, but we're really, we're committed to get it done. It's just a matter of getting it done the right way and making sure that we have a landlord that's also working with us.
And we'll do one more question to this gentleman here in the black shirt. And apologies to anyone who wasn't able to ask their question.
So I recently returned from a vacation in Maine where you do not see glass bottles or metal cans by the side of the road because they can be redeemed for 5 cents each. People save them up. They get money out of it. Other people go and pick up the ones that have been dropped so that they can make money. Small businesses that sell other things can also operate as redemption centers and use that as another source of income. They have a similar system in New York State, California, Oregon. This has been proposed in DC, but the bottled beverage industry bought TV ads saying that this was going to hurt working families. I realize none of you work in the bottled beverage industry, but you do purchase from them. Do you have any insight into why they oppose this so strongly? Because it seems to me like a win-win-win for everybody.
I think Tommy Wells could probably answer that one. Because Tommy, of course, was responsible, I think, with others in doing the plastic bag bill, and much to his credit, that took a lot. I'm sure that took a lot of lobbying and a lot of political capital you had to expend. See, you're not mayor today. But anyway, I think it's really, that's it.
One of the great things, at least about DC in our industry with restaurants, it's 90% independents. So the typical lobbyists, let's just say at a national level for our industry, they don't really represent us. And so I would say that if there are NGOs that want to get on board with that sort of thing, you'd get a stunning amount of support from the independents, because we are not these big national players with these global interests. I respect their interests too, but from our side, we would, and I'm not saying Marriott wouldn't support that. I was thinking more of probably, I would imagine, the manufacturers who, like, it's Coke, right? They think they're worried they're going to sell less. I get it, that's their job.
I think there would be a great ballot initiative for DC. I think for someone to put it on the ballot, I think would be really, really useful. And I think also an educational opportunity for people as well.
It would have my vote.
Yep, mine too.
Thank you all. Thank you, Andy. Thank you, Dan. Thank you, Denise. Thank you, Tom.